get a little prompt. So you will just have to accept that, and then we can get going. So Bill, take it away.
Thank you, Natalie. So welcome to everybody. And yes, we are here today talking about legal issues that relate to the present COVID-19 pandemic. And especially this time we're talking about the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. And as students may be aware, the government has always had employment insurance, but in the midst of the current pandemic, they implemented a Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which is for anyone, meaning students and non-students, who qualify in certain ways because of having lost income due to the pandemic. People who don't qualify for employment insurance, EI is still there for those who qualify for it, but the requirements to qualify for the Canada Emergency Response Benefit are less stringent. And that's why a lot of people who didn't qualify for EI do qualify for the CERB, CERB, as we sometimes got used to calling it. But then again, there were students who don't qualify for either one. And that was viewed as problematic. And that is why the government has implemented the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. And CESB, you can't pronounce it as one syllable word the same way you can the CERB. But, so I've gotten out of the habit of that. But the Canada Emergency Student Benefit, it is very beneficial for a lot of students, but there are still limitations. So let's talk about what it takes to qualify for it. An applicant must be someone who is either a citizen of Canada, an Indigenous person in Canada, a permanent resident, or a protected person. So international students do not qualify, and international students do qualify for employment insurance or the CERB if they meet those qualifications. They're not excluded. For example, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, many students did qualify for by virtue of having made at least $5,000 in the previous year or the previous 12 months, one or the other, and having had an income but lost it due to COVID-19. So international students who met those qualifications do qualify for the CERB. But international students do not, under any circumstances, qualify for the CESB. And I believe the thinking on that is that international students are expected to be financially self-sufficient, self-meaning themselves and their families' support from their home countries. They are legally allowed to work within Canada within certain restrictions, but there is no guarantee that work will be available. So international students are not encouraged to come relying upon working in Canada. They're encouraged to come with sufficient financial resources that they don't need to work in Canada. And then yes, they are allowed to within certain restrictions if work is available and if their academic requirements permit it and various other factors permit it. But they're not expected to be dependent on income, and that is why the CERB, if they can demonstrate that they have worked and have lost income due to COVID-19, then they qualify for it, and that's the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. But again, if they don't qualify for that by having shown that they were dependent on employment income, then they do not qualify for the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. International students do not under any circumstances. The thing is that it's recognized that Canadian students, domestic students, may have chosen not to work in anticipation of working now, either because they've done their programs or because it's the summer. So they don't have to show that they had an income in the past. They only have to show that they have been students. And so again, people who qualify as domestic students being citizens, Indigenous individuals, permanent residents, and protected persons, they must show that they are enrolled and either presently attending over the summer or continuing in September, one or the other, or that they've completed their program in December 2019 or subsequently. So again, either they've completed the program in December or at some time since, which would most likely be April, or they are still enrolled, maybe attending now, or at least enrolled and continuing in September. And in terms of people who have been students, they must fall into one of those categories. I just mentioned that there is another category of individuals who qualify for the CESB who wouldn't likely be tuning in today or listening to this presentation, but just to be complete about it, that would be high school students who are finishing high school this fall and beginning a post-secondary program by February 1st, 2021. If an individual, if a student does qualify for employment insurance or the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and has been receiving it, then they must not apply for the Canada Emergency Student Benefit as well. They're not eligible to receive both, basically. And the Canada Emergency Response Benefit in most cases pays a little more. So there's no incentive to. But just to be clear, a student who receives the CERB or EI, don't apply for the CESB as well, thinking that you'll get that too. You get one or the other. If you're already receiving, then you must not apply for the CESB. Again, then not every student is eligible to receive it. Let's stay where we are. Back. Sorry. Not every student is going to get the CESB. If you're able to work, great. Then work and earn an income. And if you're earning over $1,000 in one of the government's specific 4-week periods, then you will not qualify for the CESB. But more power to you that you're able to have a job and you're working and able to make that income. The CESB is for those who are not able to do that. And so what it means to be not able to, and not able to work and earn over $1,000 in one of the 4-week periods due to COVID-19, which means being sick with COVID-19, having to look after a dependent who is sick with it, or a child under 12, and is unable to or is unable to find work or has work but unable to earn over $1,000 in the 4-week period in respect of which they apply. And let me expand on that a little bit. The government has specified 4-week periods. And so you can't just apply for a different length of period, such as for a week or for 2 weeks and you also can't apply in respect of your own chosen 4-week period and say, oh, in these 4 weeks that I chose, I didn't make over $1,000. No, the government has specified 4-week periods, and each of those you may apply for if you qualify for it, or you don't if you don't. So it is possible for a student to apply and qualify for the CESB in respect of one 4-week period and not another, and possibly one and not the second, and then qualify again in the future. Well, how this might happen is, for example, if a student doesn't have a job, therefore applies for and receives the CESB in respect of a 4-week period, but then gets a job. So when the next 4-week period comes up, they realize they're going to be making over $1,000, so they don't apply for that one. But then for some reason, either the employer lays them off or cuts their hours, or they become ill or something, they may find that they do qualify again for the period after that. Or it could be the inverse, where they don't qualify because they have a job, they lose the job, so they do qualify in the next 4-week period, and then they get another job, and so they don't qualify and don't apply for the one after that. So every 4-week period is treated as its own 4-week period, and a student qualifies or doesn't based upon their income in that particular 4-week period. So as I say, you may qualify and receive for some and not others, and that's okay. I'll come back, I think, on another slide about what happens if you miscalculate and you either don't qualify and then realize that you should have, or the opposite. So I'll hold that thought for right now, because I know we'll come back to that. So I'm right now going through the qualifications of this, that's not passed yet, of being a domestic student, being enrolled or just having completed, not receiving another benefit, not being able to work due to COVID-19, and the last requirement is that you're actively looking for work. And again, because we're talking about either individuals who completed their program in December or since then, well, they're likely looking for a job. Or students who are enrolled and whether they're going to school over the summer, maybe just one course or so, or not at all, going back full-time in September. And again, they may likely be interested in working over the summer. So initially, and it's not my intention normally to comment on the political aspects, but it's important, I think, to understand, and there's a very good reason why, a lot of students have kind of expressed to me that they're very concerned about the government's requirement that they actively be looking for work, because they're afraid of, like, what do they need to show, and is it possible the government will come back later and say, well, you know, you can't prove that you were looking for work and we're not satisfied that you were. So it's only for that reason that I think it's valuable to give a little bit of background into how the program came to be the way that it is. It was passed by the government in the latter part of May, and as I said, employment insurance has existed for decades. The Canada Emergency Response Benefit has existed since about March. And so the government then came up with the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. And the thing is that normally, anytime the government passes legislation, it needs to do so through the House of Commons. There's a procedure, and it takes some time, what in some cases can seem like a long time. However, the government has the ability to pass legislation much more quickly if it has the unanimous support of the entire House of Commons, which means not only the government, but any and all opposition parties, members of parliament who are not part of the government, but part of other parties. So the government wanted to get the CERB passed quickly. They wanted to get the CESB passed quickly. And the CERB was. The CESB was a little bit more controversial because initially the government proposed to pay students $1,250 for every qualifying 4-week period, $1,750 for that period if they were disabled or looking after someone who was disabled. And initially the government required, again, that individuals be domestic students, be enrolled, unable to work due to COVID-19. They were not initially going to impose the requirement that the applicants be actively looking for work. The problem was that the opposition parties were not willing to agree to provide the unanimous consent to allow it to be passed quickly in that form. And that meant the government would have to have gone through the process that would have taken weeks to pass it their way without the support of the opposition parties. And the government did not want to have students waiting weeks to receive the CESB. They wanted to have it passed in a matter of days or even hours, but they needed the consent of all members of the House of Commons. So the Democratic Party first proposed that students who are looking after a disabled individual or who are disabled themselves receive $2,000 rather than the proposed $1,750, so that they were on the same level as recipients of the CERB. The government went along with that. It was then the Conservative Party that said that they really wanted some evidence that applicants were actively looking for work. So that is why the government then said, all right, that they would add that, because by making those two changes, they received the support of both the NDP and the Conservative Party, and they were able to pass it quickly, unanimously, but they had to make those two changes. And so the actively looking for work piece, again, the government's own thinking was that students who have completed a program, they may not have been working toward the end of their program because of the academic demands of a program, especially toward the end. And students who are off for the summer may not have been working while school was underway, again, whatever semester they were in because of the academic demands. But the government initially, as I say, was prepared to assume that students who have recently completed their programs are going to be looking for work. They weren't going to require evidence. And likewise, they were willing to assume that students who are off for the summer would like to work, and they were not going to require evidence. In order to get the CESB passed quickly, as I say, they agreed to the Conservative Party's requested amendment that there be a requirement that the applicant be actively looking for work. So I say all that to say that students have expressed to me concern, as I said, about are they going to come after me and demand evidence I was looking for work and not be satisfied? Well, pardon me, here is how I would advise to avoid that. The government has a job bank, which any CESB applicant can register with. The job bank sends tips about job search, tips about writing resumes and cover letters, that kind of thing. And more important, it has a list of available jobs. And I believe it even, once you create your profile, it sends jobs that one may be qualified for. Now, I don't think there's going to be enough jobs to go around. I mean, there never is at the best of times for summer students and recent graduates, and all the more under these circumstances. But in terms of proving that you've actively looked for work, register for the job bank, because you may get a job through it. You should certainly follow up on anything that any possible jobs that the job bank sends you, and keep written evidence like of the application of any response that you receive, including a rejection. It's very important to keep copies of rejections, whether they come electronically or in hard copy. Don't just discard them because they're rejections. Keep them because they are valuable evidence of your job search. And so again, if you register for the job bank, you do apply for what you feel you might be able to do in terms of your qualifications and the location and that kind of thing. That is one great way to have evidence that you are actively looking for work. You're not legally required to register for the job bank. If you don't, then I simply, again, strongly recommend that you do much the same thing. Have evidence that you've looked for jobs. Keep copies of ads that you've applied for. Keep records of any, like I say, rejections that you get. If you just talk to an employer, a prospective employer over the telephone, keep a written log of that. On June 18th at 1 p.m., I called the employer to follow up, or they called me back and they said, not right now, or sorry you didn't get it, whatever. Make notes of that. And that really is not difficult to do. And I believe that that's all the government's going to expect of any applicant. they are going to be very firm about qualifying for it financially. So by all means, don't apply for it and receive it if you are working and making over $1,000 in that 4-week period, because the government will not have much sympathy. From the very beginning, before any party asked for amendments, they intended to draw the line as only for those who are making under $1,000. So yes, take that very seriously. The job search aspect, less so. The government, like I say, initially, they believed that students would be looking. They were not going to make that a requirement. I've explained why they did. And the government itself is, now that the CESB has been passed, that's not at the forefront of their minds. And they're not going to deploy the resources to enforce that stringently. Register for the job bank, keep evidence of what happens, jobs you apply for, what employers say, and then don't worry. So on that note, let's move on to the next slide. I mentioned before about the amounts, the $1,250 for individual students without a disability, the $2,000 if disabled or caring for a child under 12 or someone with a disability. And having already kind of talked about that, we can go on to the next slide. Other considerations, yes. If a student has previously filed income tax with the Canada Revenue Agency, they'll already be registered with a CRA. And that will help when you apply for a CESB. They'll already know who you are. And if you've filed income tax in the past, being a student, you most likely will have received a refund. People who make a lot of money sometimes don't have enough income tax taken off and they end up owing some at the end of the year. But students or anybody who doesn't make a lot of money rarely ends up having to pay at the end of the year. More often they receive a refund due to certain credits that they're entitled to and so forth. So if you have ever filed, like I say, then you're already registered with the CRA. And if the CRA has sent you a refund, they will have done one or two things. Either you'll have been registered for direct deposit, and they will have direct deposited that previous refund into your bank account. They'll use the same information now for the CESB. If you need to change your information on record with them because you've changed banks or something, well then yes, you'll need to do that. If not, then the CRA already has your direct deposit information, and they will likewise direct deposit the CESB. If you are not registered for direct deposit, but the government has previously sent you a check for any income tax refund, then likewise they will send the CESB by way of a check. If you never filed income tax and you're not registered with the CRA, then there is a link on the government website to show you how to register with them so that you can receive the CESB. You do need to be registered, and like I say, if you're never filed income tax and you're not registered, then that's all you need to do is to register now through a link that is on the website. And I'll just mention with this and anything else, if a student is trying to go through this process of applying and just finds that there's some glitch, they're not able to do it, I am available by email really 7 days a week. And I don't know whether we'll show my email address later. I'll mention now my email address is w.a.reid@gmail.com. And I believe possibly Natalie can put that up as well. And
yes, I'll put it in the chat.
Great, thank you, Natalie. So if you find that the application process bogs down despite the things that I've said, just email me and I will help you through whatever glitch you're experiencing. So that's with respect to how you'll get it. Going back to the fact of it being for those who who are not making more than $1,000 in a qualifying period, and I said that a student may qualify for one period and not another, you really, in applying, have two options. You can apply before the 4-week period is up based upon your expected earnings. If you're pretty sure that you're going to make over $1,000, you know not to apply. If you're pretty sure you're not going to make over $1,000, then you can apply before the 4-week period is over. And as long as you're correct either way, that's great. If you're not sure, then you may wait until the 4-week period is over and apply for a certain time after that 4-week period is over, and after you've seen what your earnings were. If you're not sure, well, then it may be wise, if you're financially able to wait until the 4-week period is over, see what you made, then you know for sure. Made over 1,000, don't apply. Made under 1,000, go ahead and apply. Anyone may make a mistake, of course. And this is where, if you don't apply because you think you're going to make over $1,000 and then it turns out that you didn't, well, then apply, even if it's a little bit after that 4-week period has expired. Conversely, this is, I guess, like the most problematic. If you thought you weren't going to make over $1,000, so you applied and received the CESB, and then you make over 1,000. You find out by the end of the 4-week period, you made over 1,000, in addition to having applied for and received the CESB. Don't panic. It simply means that you made an understandable error in projecting your expected income. And it simply means that now you need to repay the CESB that you received for that 4-week period, because lo and behold, you made over $1,000 after all. And again, the government is going to be stringent eventually on people who have received these payments and didn't deserve them, but they're not going to be hard on people who accidentally received them and voluntarily repaid it. There is information on the CESB website. There's also on the CERB website about how do you repay a payment that you received and shouldn't have. And I have already helped people to do it. So again, if you received a check, you send the check back. If you deposited the check, you can cut your own. If it was by direct deposit, you can write your own check. It's on the websites, but again, I can assist anybody who's not sure. And if you feel the need to write any kind of explanatory letter, then absolutely I can help you with that as well. So that's, like I say, there's a means to repay if you make a mistake and accidentally receive it when you shouldn't. People have asked me whether the CESB and the CERB, in both cases, whether they are taxable. Well, like employment insurance itself, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and the Canada Emergency Student Benefit are both taxable, but that doesn't mean you're going to necessarily end up paying tax, or certainly very much, on it. Let me just for a sec while I have a drink.
For anybody who's listening, I've put some links that Bill has referred to in the chat function, so you can check them out there.
And thank you, Natalie. Yes. So the payments, all of these, are theoretically taxable income, the same as employment income is taxable income. It doesn't mean you'll end up paying tax. And what I mean by that is that when you go to do your 2020 income tax in early 2021, yes, you must declare the CESB or the CERB, whichever you may receive, or EI, alongside any employment income. And the thing is, though, that every individual, there is a basic personal exemption of around $13,000. So when you add up your income, before you calculate what tax you should pay or should have paid on it, you deduct that basic personal exemption of $13,000. So if the government benefits that you receive and any employment income and all of that add up to $13,000 or less, it's going to reduce that income to zero. And although all that income is theoretically taxable, it's low enough that you will pay zero tax. If it all adds up to, say, $16,000, well, you deduct the 13, it brings it down to around $3,000. And again, in that situation, if you worked some, you may have had income tax deducted, and so you may still not be owing any tax, especially as a student paying tuition. You also receive the tuition fee deductions, and you may choose to use those, you may choose to apply them to future years, but if you owe tax, you're required to some degree. So really, as a student, like I say, anybody, any non-student has that $13,000 basic exemption, but students, by the time that other deductions that they may qualify for are factored in, students can earn really close to $20,000, and the deductions reduce them down to a zero taxable income. So again, yes, it's theoretically taxable, but you probably won't end up owing tax on it because of how much a person is able to make before income tax kicks in. So let me mention who would likely be the individual who might end up caught by this and might owe tax on CESB or CERB. That would be a student. We talked about recent graduates qualifying. If you completed a program in December or in April, that you would qualify. And many people, as we know, it takes a while to find a job. So even someone who completed back in December, certainly one who completes in April 2020, maybe looking now, not finding a job, qualifying for the CESB and receiving it, but then may get a good job, maybe around September or so, may receive a job offer and take a job in the field in which they studied and have an income of, on an annual basis, $60,000, for example. Well, that's great for them. Obviously, we're happy for them, and that's how we want to see things work. But if that student has received CESB over the summer and then starts making a really good income come September, the employer will be required to deduct income tax as well as Canada Pension and Employment Insurance, but make those deductions based upon a $60,000 annual income, but it's not the employer's responsibility to know that that individual previously received the CESB over the summer. So when that individual goes to file income tax in early 2021, they'll have to declare the income they made from September to December. They'll also have to claim the CESB that they received, and they will get to deduct, they'll receive credit for the income tax that the employer deducted, but that's the individual from whom probably not as much income tax will be deducted as they will end up owing. And they're the one, if you end up getting that good job come September and you start making that really good income, realize your employer probably will not take off enough income tax to take into account the fact you received the CESB. You're the one who might put aside $500 or $1,000 or so as just extra tax that you might have to pay in 2021 by virtue of having received the CESB and then gotten that good job. Anybody else, don't worry about it. And I think then that we've really covered, because we already talked about the political implications. So if we move on to, is there another slide, or are we? Yeah, okay. So just briefly to compare to the kind of emergency response benefit, yes, the CERB, many students would qualify for if they can show that they made the $5,000 in 2019 or the 12 months before they applied. So that's who qualifies, including students who have that income for the CERB. students who don't have that income, they then still qualify for the CESB. And that really is, I think we've covered everything else. So that really is the information I really wanted to share. And if we have questions, we're happy to discuss any that anybody wants to. If you really don't want to discuss your question in this context, by all means, email me anytime. We can discuss your own situation one-on-one via email. But if you have questions you'd like to discuss now, feel free. I think that Natalie will be able to vet them for us.
Yeah, if you have any questions and you are unable to speak, just put them in the chat and then I can relay them to Bill. Like you said, if you don't have any questions or if it's something personal, you can always email him. He's always available to help students out. And then if you have any additional questions after that, we do have our website that has some resources up there as well. So I'll wait a few seconds to see if there's any questions coming in. But right now, thanks, Bill, for providing a great detail of the benefit. I for sure learned a lot that I didn't even know. So thank you for giving some insight on the new government stuff. I haven't received any questions. I'll wait a few seconds, but we do have another workshop coming up in July that Bill is also going to be hosting about some benefit income replacement and possibly some landlord-tenant stuff.
Yeah, housing situations, yes. Yeah.
I have a question. It's probably on a personal level, but I'll put it out there. So someone is an international student and their program has been suspended until winter 2021 due to COVID. Is there anything that you can provide, or is it more of a personal thing?
Well, I know that some programs, the colleges and universities will continue to run because they can run them remotely or remotely with a limited amount of hands-on on campus. Some programs just can't be run that way. Mm-hmm. And I suspect that that's the kind of program that this individual is referring to.
I assume so. They're asking, what does this mean for my visa?
Yeah. Well, again, it's a situation that the government never foresaw or would want to have had to foresee. And I would think that you're not necessarily, like you wouldn't prefer to remain in Canada in that situation. The problem is whether you are allowed to travel back to your home country. Mm-hmm. So I think if an individual in that situation is allowed to travel to their home country, then they have a decision to make whether to do so and to come back. And if they are not allowed to travel anyway, then they may have to stay here. I know that the government, I talked before about the limitations on international students working, and the government has lifted some of those to remove the 20-hour cap on an international student working off campus if they're working in a field that is beneficial during the pandemic. So as long as that continues to be the case, then a student who remains in Canada may be able to work even full-time. However, then the problem that we have is that the study permit that they were issued will have anticipated when the program would be completed, and it is likely now going to be taking longer, going beyond the initial expiration of their study permit. Mm-hmm. So I would see a student in that situation having to apply for an extension of the study permit. Now that has always kind of been done because students have sometimes for one reason or another, they have extended their program. Either the most obvious thing is if they take another program, but if they upgrade from a 2-year program to a 3-year program, they apply to extend their study permit. If they fail a course or somehow have to catch up a course and it takes them longer for that reason, well, then likewise, they have to apply to extend their study permits. So the whole thing of applying to extend study permits isn't new. It's only having to do so for this reason that's new. But the good part is the government obviously is fully aware of the pandemic. And so if a student has to extend their study permit because it's not going to take longer to complete their program, there is the application form for that. They will just need the documentation they would need anyway from the college to indicate what the expected end date is now. And I don't see a problem with the government extending study permits for students in that situation to the new expected completion date.
Okay. I told the student to email directly if that didn't answer his question. So he probably will email you if he needs.
Right. Okay.
Okay. And then the other student doesn't have any other questions. So if they are happy with those answers and don't have any more questions, then we can end the workshop.
Very good. Well, thanks to all. Good to see you, Natalie, and good to have the
Yes. Thanks again, Bill. And I will email everybody that attended today, the workshop, the recording, and maybe a small survey.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks again, Bill.
You're welcome. Take care.
Take care.